evening, everyone. This is Kim with Ramblings with Kim. I actually wasn't intending to do a podcast on the Prince and Princess of Wales coming to America because they are so fabulous within themselves. I thought that maybe, just maybe, Harry had one sliver of decency left in his little body that he might have been able to keep it together. But I should have known better, which is why I jumped ship so many months ago. Anyways, he couldn't do that. And so now, of course, we've got people running for the hills, yelling, racist, 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 racist. And this is a podcast that I had been intending to do on Zimbabwe. And since we have this wonderful preacher who had to come out and yell racism and colonialism and how horrible that is for the world, and yes, it is, because guess what? Boston, we are, or were, former colonies. Yeah, go figure. That's how we obtained most of our technology advances. I can't speak today. Can't imagine why I can't speak today. I can't speak today because I'm not feeling well, which is why I have no makeup on. Okay. So this is Kim, Ramblings with Kim. That's what I do best. I have been wanting to talk about Zimbabwe for a very long time, and there's a particular reason why. One, when I lived overseas in Germany, my husband was a Green Beret. I had a good friend who was born and somewhat raised in Zimbabwe until the upheavals. And I didn't know a lot about what she had gone through in Zimbabwe, except that it was very, very, very traumatic for her. Two, I have been to Zimbabwe. I have seen what has happened in Zimbabwe under Mugabe. Three, I do not speak their native language. When I was offered an opportunity to work at an embassy, it was in a country whose language was French, which I'm more comfortable with. However, if you look back at one of my videos, it's obvious I need a refresher on French. I mean, yeah, there's no denying that. And I have been working on it. So I do a little bit better. Now, their official language is Chua, and feel free to correct me. Do not be nasty about it. You're going to behave when it comes to this, because I will not accept what Lady Susan Hussey went through. I am going to tell you the facts, and that is all. I am going to tell you my experience being in Zimbabwe for a month. I am going to tell you my friend's experience being in Zimbabwe through the UN and then the upheaval of the Civil War. That is what I am here to tell you. Not for you to come on here and tell me that I'm wrong, but you know no one that has gone through this, or that I possibly could not know what's going on because of the color of my skin. Because what people do not seem to understand is that in Africa, there ended up being a reverse racism. And I'm going to get to that. So let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Let's say everyone stayed in their own neat little country and we didn't go out and explore. That is against human nature. There are always people that want to go out and explore. We have people that want to explore Mount Everest. They weren't going out there to explore Mount Everest to say, okay, now the mountain's mine, I'm going to keep it, and no one else can have it. Denali is the same way. Yes, it was called Mount McKinley after the man, or after our president, but it is now called Denali out of respect for the Native Americans, and I fully support that. It is absolutely gorgeous, but they did not climb the mountain and say, okay, now this mountain is mine. Yes, we did take a lot of land away from Native Americans, and we should be giving more of that back. But there's a certain subset in America that is not wanting to give that land back. And it's not people like me, lifelong card-carrying Democrat. Just saying. It happens to be some other people. So, we explore everywhere. We want to see if the world is round. We want to see what is on the other side of that mountain. I have been exploring the forests of Oregon since I could walk. I would take off, and my dad taught me basic skills, and I would leave in the morning and I come back in the evening. I just would take off, and that was it. I knew how to basically find my way back to the camp, and I would have fun all day long. That's what I did. A lot of children did that, particularly where I grew up, because we were so far to the west. It's not as much like that anymore, where we were able to do things like that. On the East Coast, obviously, you might not be able to do as much exploration as we are able to do. Now, colonialism. Let's just take away the fact that Britain, the Dutch, the Germans, Portugal, Spain went out and decided they wanted to colonialize anything that they could find. Divide up Africa according to resources, and they were going to take over Africa. Before that, Africa was run by tribes and warlords. So Africa was doing the same thing that they're doing to each other now. We gave them sophisticated weapons in order to be able to basically eat themselves alive. So for someone to come along and say that it is racist, yes, it was racist for us to take the slaves, either ourselves, round them up, or pay other tribes to round them up and bring them to our countries. I will readily die on my grave saying that. Our countries should not have been involved in that. Looking at the time frame, there are a lot of things back then that we shouldn't have done. I mean, we can talk about the way women were treated, the way children were treated. Yes, there were a lot of things that were horrific. And I look back on it and I'm thinking, yes, that's horrible. Of course. Who would think that that was an appropriate way to behave? No one. Absolutely no one. There is this wonderful movie, at least I think it is. It's called Belle. It's an English movie, and it's about a young woman who is illegitimate, and she's British, and her father gives her her last name, and she helps an attorney in London win this case about treating slaves as cargo and not as basically as people. And so looking at it that way, yes, we needed to do those types of things. We should not have been doing any of it all along. I believe the UK was ahead of us when it came to things like that, as far as slavery and outlawing slavery and racism and systemic racism. You can see how horrible our country is at this particular point in time. Kanye West thinking, he's bipolar, and they're going on and letting him on TV, and our past president having dinner with white supremacists and things like that. I mean, it's just horrific. But for some reason, our country seems to think that's okay. I don't, and you can tell I'm pretty darn white. So let's go back to, I'm gonna touch on this one country, Zimbabwe. My friend, I'm going to name her first name, Dolly. I met her when I was living overseas in Germany, and she wanted to join the Girl Scouts, and I was in charge of the Girl Scouts at that particular point in time. And in order to get her a pass on to the military installations, I needed her passport. Her passport was from Zimbabwe. And that was one of the biggest difficulties I was having trying to get her a pass onto a military installation, was the fact that it was from Zimbabwe. And I didn't think about it at the time because I was wrapped up with school, Girl Scouts, 4 children. My youngest was being diagnosed as autistic. My son had rheumatoid arthritis. My oldest daughter was a track savant and had ADHD. My other daughter would go septic on me constantly. And my husband was a Green Beret who spent the majority of his time, wait for it, in Africa. Yes. So, as you could tell, I was an extremely busy military wife. And during our free time, we were generally traveling. me and my girlfriends, me and my kids. Every once in a while, some members of my family might come out and we would go do things. And it was just, one of those kinds of situations, because I was going to take advantage of everything that I possibly could. Well, Dolly never really she somewhat alluded to the fact of what she went through during that time. Like, she was really afraid of the UN. She wanted nothing to do with the UN. She talked about having to leave virtually in the middle of the night. She was Jewish, and from what I got, I've studied the Holocaust since I was 8. I'm not going to give away my age. Most of you know I'm way up there. And so my understanding was that more than likely her parents had either left after the Holocaust or somewhere before it was started or was starting, and moved to Africa to get out of harm's way. And that's where she was born and grew up in her younger years. And they seem to have a somewhat idyllic childhood until things started to fall apart in Zimbabwe. Now, some of this I'm going to read from the State Department. Some of this I'm going to read from some other various sources, only because I am not a historian on Zimbabwe. I'm just not. I've been there. I know some. I know her. I don't feel that I have to be a historian, considering what some people are throwing out there right now. I could literally read to you a wiki page and I would know more than 99.9% of the people and what they're talking about Zimbabwe right now, or racism and the royal family and what happened in Africa and what they think that the royal family did. And why they think that the royal family is responsible for what's happening with this certain woman who has done nothing but try and destroy the royal family for no reason whatsoever, except I have no idea. To me, she looks like a complete and total fool. I have more grievance against my own family than she has against the royal family. And I'm looking at her going, girl, seriously, put on your big girl panties and stop acting like a spoiled, rotten brat. Because right now, you're saying everyone hates you. Now, I've got, yes, my immediate family, and it basically came down to my mother, who's always just been a capital B. And then there were my grandparents and my aunt and uncle, who always tried to protect me from her. Well, as they got older, of course, they started dying and they couldn't. And so it got to the point where I just had to basically flee on foot. Not really on foot. The military just dropped me off in Colorado Springs, and I've lived here ever since. And that's what happened. But I didn't get I didn't marry a prince. I didn't get $30 million. I didn't get the prince's daddy to give me all this money. I don't fly private everywhere I go. Yes, I do live a comfortable existence. My grandparents did leave me a sizable, I can't think of the word. You tell why I don't feel well, because I can't think of words. That the stutter. That's why I always tell people about Biden. If he's saying the wrong word or he can't think of a word, the wrong word comes out. A lot of times it has to do with the stutter, and it's not that he's just old. It's just stutters do that. They left me a relatively large inheritance. They knew I would need it, but they were afraid I would need it. So to get back to Zimbabwe, we have fighting warlords. Then Africa's cut up into pieces after the slaves are taken away and brought all over the place. And the majority, it seems like, land in America. Full disclaimer, I have a distant relative, a direct descendant on my maternal grandfather's side who fought in the Civil War and lost his leg to cannonball, and that's what I have. He had no slaves. I guess he supported slavery, but he lived in Tennessee at the time and had to fight for. Yeah. So let's see. So it comes down to resources, as everything does. There's a lot of gold in Africa. There's a lot of precious resources, minerals, oil, ivory, as Prince William has been trying to save, which we're going to touch on because Zimbabwe is trying to circumvent this new the ivory trade agreement that they have in place. And basically there are two thoughts. Now, this is in the 1700s. So there were still slaves coming out of Africa in the 1700s. But Zimbabwe is completely on the other side. That's not to say that the slave trade routes are not coming across Africa or not going around the Cape Horn, which is not the safest of ways to travel. But by this time, the Americas are finding it easier to breed slaves as opposed to get more slaves for obvious reasons. It's cheaper, safer. There's some other reasons. If you have some historical information that you would like to share nicely, please put those in the comments. I'm always willing to be educated nicely. You will not bully me. It's very difficult to bully a war widow with 4 children, as the people at my work are finding out. I could bring it on. So the empire in the Zimbabwe area were trading with the Portuguese, but then they were having droughts. And of course, it was causing issues in this area. And if you have droughts, you have fights, you have issues over food, issues over water, issues over resources. We're finding that out now in the modern day. What happens? Prices go up and people have to readjust their priorities. And we are trying to address that with climate change as opposed to other things. Now, on the other hand, they had Dutch settlers coming in as well. So we have different factions that are coming into Zimbabwe. And basically, it comes in to the see if I can get back to where I needed to be. There we go. And it's going to be hard for me to try and edit this. So let's see if I can get a hold of this. Before Zimbabwe was called Zimbabwe, it was called Rhodesia. And I believe Charlize Theron was actually from Rhodesia, or perhaps it was Charlene of Monaco. I will find that out and I'll put that in the comments. So the British South Africa Company had gone in and were helping to demarcate the land in 1890, and it turned into a 15-year guerrilla warfare with Black nationalist forces, and they tried to get the white separatist minority government unilaterally declared independence as Rhodesia, and this was before the Black nationalist forces, and this was in 1965. Now, my guess would be that this was when Dolly and her family were so traumatized that she left. Now, I took her to Poland with me, and we happened to be, I couldn't find the hotel. It was really late at night. We used to take these Polish pottery runs after our husbands would come home from work on Friday, and then we get there like at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because we leave like at 6, and then we get up like at 6:37. We shop all day, and then we drive straight home. Well, I got lost, and one night I happened to be driving a rental car because we were leaving. We were moving out of Germany, And a cop happened to be following us. And I didn't notice this at the time, but apparently they noticed there was a big, giant German Shepherd in this car. Dolly was freaking out. And I'm like, it's okay. I didn't understand what the problem was. And we got to and we ended up getting pulled over. My German was okay. My Polish, not so much. His German was okay. His Polish obviously was great. He got us to the hotel. He said, thank you. And Dolly then broke down crying and explained to me the whole Zimbabwe story about how they lost their land. They were taken out by force. There were dogs. There was the UN, and basically put on a flight and sent to America. And she was a young child at the time. So you can only imagine how traumatic this was. And it only had to do with the color of her skin. So her family had already gone through the Holocaust, and now she was being forced out of her home because she was white and sent to America. So basically, she had endured racism, or her family had endured racism already twice within a short span of like 20 years. And no one thinks about that. So after we go through all this war, Zimbabwe joined the Commonwealth of Nations. You know, the Commonwealth that everyone thinks is so bad, that that is racist and horrible, and that the royal family is, you know, I don't know, keeping people in and forcing them to join so they can get their, I don't know, their resources. I don't understand what Dr. Shola and her merry band of idiots are talking about. The Commonwealth is a trade organization. It's like basically the UN, or, you know, the, something along those lines, but basically on specifically trade and protecting each other and giving each other the opportunities to have first dibs, right? So like if you have a neighborhood co-op or something along those lines. So they were in the Commonwealth, but Mugabe couldn't behave. So they get kicked out of the Commonwealth. Well, there's a reason Mugabe couldn't behave. Because he was a warlord. He was a black warlord. He got power, and they withdrew them from the Commonwealth in 2003. Now, it's shortly they then end white minority rule. He became president, and he was an authoritarian. So please, someone explain to me how that is not racist. Now, every once in a while, someone says you can't be racist if you are something other than white. And I used to buy that, but I don't anymore, because it's just, I keep seeing these people on Twitter, and then I research and I do some more, and I see what's happening with the royal family. And then I go to Zimbabwe and I see what happened to them. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not true. So we decide to go to Zimbabwe. Well, we don't really decide to go to Zimbabwe. I happen to have a boyfriend who's a big game hunter. Do not judge me. I love animals. It was really hard for me to go. The World Cup was in South Africa. All right. I kind of got bribed into going, which, by the way, Dr. Pepper, this is my new favorite drink. I've changed from that, from my organic lemonade, which I still do drink. If you would like to sponsor me, I'd love it. Send me a few cases of Dr. Pepper my way. Yes. So I was bribed. And then we land in Bulawayo. And we are picked up by the guide, where then we have a 2 to 3 hour drive. And what I saw was horrific. There is, and along the way, we're told what is going on. The guide has been told that he used to have a house and some land, and what has happened under Mugabe is that anyone who is white, their homes and their land were taken away and given to the natives, where the natives then promptly went in and used them as huts. So they did not use them as they were houses. They just moved their families in there, made a fire in the living room, and slept around it and cooked around it. And that's what they did. They did not have any reliable cell phone service or any reliable phone service. So they had to use sat phones. My husband always used a sat phone. I always thought it was for protection. In Zimbabwe, after the whites were kicked out, the natives had gone in and stripped all of the resources. So they had stripped all the copper, all the wire, all the plumbing, anything that they could find that they could sell out of this country, and sold it. So they had no phone service, no plumbing. All the technological advances that they had previously, they no longer had. So it's not like Mugabe came in and said, all right, white people, we're kicking you out, and now we're going to install this black family in here, and we're going to ensure that we monitor and keep this phone system in place. No, that's not what he did. He just said, white people bad, black people good, now go for it. And if you want to keep something, you're going to give me money. End of story. We stayed on Chelsea Davies' father's basically nature reserve. And yes, there are kickbacks there. that's the only way to survive under Mugabe or under any type of warlord that is going on in Africa. That is what is happening in many parts of Africa. But this is what I wanted to tell you about Zimbabwe. That was a British colony, a British protectorate, which obviously was not the best thing. I mean, look at South Africa, which was not the best thing. But was it any better? I mean, let's play devil's advocate. Was it any better once Mugabe came in? No. He just did the same thing to the white people, and the black people aren't any better off. So stop getting on your high horse and acting like, oh, but racism is so bad, and the royal family is racist. Because Lady Hussey wanted to ask this woman where was she from because she was dressed up like a cheetah and came in on someone else's or under someone else's charity. I have looked at so much information on her that she has approximately 50 different stories that she's telling on the internet. She can't even keep them straight. Because that's what happens when you lie. That's what's happened to Meghan Markle because she lies. She can't keep her stories straight. And then people attack you because you bring out the inconsistencies. That's why I always clarify. I'm not an expert. This is my experience going to Zimbabwe. Having a friend. It's a secondhand experience having a friend in Zimbabwe. She's not going to come on here. She's the sweetest person you would ever want to meet, but she was so traumatized by that one experience that we had almost 20 years ago. She won't even talk about it when we talk. I mean, that's how traumatic it is. What do you say to somebody like that? But we see what's happening in Northern Africa. That's where my husband spent most of his time. That's where my other husband was killed. Because there's so much instability in Northern Africa that we have Al-Qaeda. We have all the other wannabe, whatever they are anymore. I can't keep track, to tell you the truth. They wanted me to go to Malawi, yes. And then it collapsed. Told my husband, like, you dodged a bullet there. And my husband was there 20 years ago, scoping out terrorists. And look at all that died. So many more people died. So many more than they did, and no one says a thing. That's what we have going on. So, or should we put $317 billion a year